Hi everyone, Gustaw here, and today we'll be talking about one specific use case related mainly with the labeling position. So we will be working on this top chart, as you can see here, and we'll be building the solution which is visible here. There are certain caveats, there are certain pros and cons of these solutions, and I will walk you through of all the certain steps on how we can achieve that and when we can achieve that. Because to be honest, sometimes we just have to do some simple steps to achieve it in a most efficient and its most simplistic way as possible. However, there are sometimes also the use cases where this kind of the workarounds can be useful. And the reason why I wanted to share this piece of hints with you today is based on a real life example with one of the client's reports when we building this kind of solution, because there are two different and very important requirements for the solution. The first one, it has to be achieved using the column charts instead of any other kind of the charts. So the good alternative could be also to use the line charts. However, as the end users who actually use the report are more accustomed to using the column instead of the line charts, the main requirements is to use the column chart. And the second thing is also what was important is that the line chart is, although great, works great in many occasions, there's also the certain scenarios when the column charts can be a good pick in terms of the chart selection, especially if we dealing with the data sets and we might have a lot of different blanks for our periods. In that case, the columns might be a little bit more straightforward for the end users comparing to the lines if we have a lot of zero values or the blanks. So this kind of things require to use the column charts. So we try to make some kind of the workarounds to make the labeling, the positioning, and the visibility of these labels a little bit like more transparent to the end users. And one actually thing what was also important is to show all the actuals and all the previous year values for both columns. So the case with the standard column chart with the basic positioning of the labels, in some cases influence those positioning of the labels in such way that we weren't able to see the actuals for each column. So you can see that sometimes, depending on the values itself or for the previous year and actuals, sometimes we can see the previous year values, sometimes we can see the actuals, and it was required to see all the labels for both the actuals and the previous year, because there are certain use cases there where we can use a completely different methods, completely different steps. So one of them, as you can see now, we are using the month on our x-axis from, it's like the January, February, March, etc. So it's the text type of the columns. It forces us to use the so-called the categorical x-axis type. You can see that here it's actually not appear as an categorical or continuous. It's actually, it can be only categorical because it's the text type. However, like one of the the more simple way to achieve a different label density is just to use not the text type column, but rather to pick, let's say, the start of month to get the continuous axis type. Don't bother about these grid lines, the vertical ones. It's not important at this stage. However, what I wanted to show is that if we use let's say, the start of month, we can get the continuous axis type. And in that case, we are now able to control the label density, for instance. So if we go to, let's say, either to previous year or to actuals on just to apply on all series, now it's like the 0, but we can control that. We can have a 100% data labels visibility, or we can pick any other label density to show maybe only the meaningful ones. So let's say the maximum, the minimum, the first, the last one, and so on, depending on the label density threshold selected. So it actually allows us to limit the number of label density. In that case, we can declutter the chart, which is a good thing, and it might work well. However, in this use case, as I mentioned, we just need to use all the labels. So in that case, we would have to use the label density 100% for both the actuals and the previous year, because we want to see all the labels. So actually using the continuous axis won't work well in this particular use case. There are certain like quick wins here that we can apply, not even touching this kind of the layout, this kind of the formatting options. We can do certain steps even on the level of this chart. And one possible actually a few possible steps may include one, just adding a 1000 separator. So let's say we can go here, we can click on the revenue AC actuals, revenue PY, revenue previous year. Let's start with the revenue actuals. If we go to the format, we can, for example, apply the 1000 separators just here. And it can look like that one also for the negatives, and we also have our zeros visible. So in that case, you can see that now we added the separators here. So just looking at this chart, how it actually looked like previously, it would be one of the first steps I would like to achieve. I would like to apply. It's related with the adding the 1000 separators. The second thing is that we can go to the data labels, and we can actually apply for our value section. We can define that our display units, it shouldn't be the auto or none. It can be like fixed on the thousands. It's not always the case. There will be certain use cases that we want to have it as an auto, maybe in some cases the millions, etc. For this particular use case, thousands will be sufficient. We can also determine whether we would like to see the value for decimal places, whether it is like the 1 decimal place, in some cases too. But in these use cases, we'll be fine with just knowing without having the value decimal places. So 0 here will be enough. So even with these small steps, now you can see that it's a little bit more visible, more transparent in terms of the data label density and in terms of the labels in general. It looks a little bit better. In an ideal world, we might also don't want to see the suffixes like the K, like thousands at the end. We might also want to erase this kind of the suffixes, and just to place, for example, in the subtitles, we could annotate the end user that the data is displayed in the thousands, and it will be even more, in many cases, it will be even more valid approach than using the case. However, this was the more simplistic approach, the more simple one. That's why I wanted to show you as well as an alternative. The small caveat here is that, as you can see, the April values and the November values for actuals are not visible because of the placement of, I will also turn off the tooltips because it's a little bit distracting. So now we can see that the April values and the November values are not visible here, which is the thing we want to change, because as we mentioned, we wanted to see all the values for the actuals. So what we can do here is actually to achieve this kind of the result when we have the two layers of the labels, and it doesn't has to be like the setup in a way that is shown here. It doesn't have to be like the two layers of the labels. Here we have the labels for the actuals and the labels for the previous year. The previous year are a little bit in a grayish color corresponding to the grayish columns. However, it's not always the case. We might also have only a one layer of these labels. And we also might also replace the actuals and previous year, for example, with the absolute variances or the relative variances, and I will show that later on. Just to show you a general logic behind this kind of the solution is that you can see that there is one additional column, the measure applied here. It's now turned on the transparent level. So if we go to the placeholder, you can see that the color for the fill is turned on 100%, so it's not visible. The same with the border, but if I would like to see the transparency, just to show you how it may look like, you can see that between the previous year values and actuals, you can see that there is one additional column in the middle, which allows us to create like the maximum ceiling for our values. And the values are applied if we go to the data labels for this particular series, which is the blank one. It's intentionally named as the blank with the one invisible character, like the space, for example. You can see there is a value and the detail. The detail is the previous year. Now I will turn that off and on, so you can see that there is a change here. And the value is, in that case, it's the top layer. It's actuals in that case. So if I will turn off the value and the detail, there is no data labels visible. But if we go with only the values, we can see the one layer. And if we also apply the detail, we can see the two layers. And as I mentioned, both the value and the detail can be changed to the different measure if needed, depending on what we would like to achieve, what we would like to see in our chart. So this is like the basic basic general information for you. And now we will be building this solution. Before building the solution, I will turn on the transparency here for 100%, just to show you once again how it can look like. There are a lot of different nuances, and we will cover that in a minute. So we will start building a solution where we actually find a maximum value across the periods, meaning across the periods we are focusing on the months, and even being more specifically on months and years. It's not only the 1 month, it's like the month and year. It's also important to take into account the year in the context. In that case, we have filtered 2024, and we have the text type months, the short abbreviated names on our x-axis, which is also important. And let's start building. Maybe before starting a building, let's pick our measures. We will drag the month, year column here. And we will also use the revenue AC actuals. We also bring the revenue previous year. At this point, it doesn't matter whether the revenues AC is the first column or the previous year. We are all using this table for the calculation purposes, not for the actual presentation of the data. And what we would like to achieve is having the maximum value across all of these items from the January 24 to December 24 to see what is the value for the maximum months. So in that case, let's focus only on the actuals. The maximum actuals is probably in February 24, which is 259,000. So we are trying to find this particular value. So let's call our measure, like for our working purposes, it's gonna be like called the max value, and we actually the max value here. There are a few approaches, and I just show you the one that I would personally wouldn't pick. It's like the outcome will be quite similar or even the same one, but I would like to show you a few approaches. So let's say we would like to use all selected, and then we are using that in our table now, and we would like to find actually the max value of our months in that case. And for now, let's only pick the revenue AC, only looking at the actuals, because we would like to also check the previous year, because in some filter context, actually the previous year column can be higher than the actuals. So it's not the full story that we are checking only the actuals. We have to also check the values for the actual, because for the previous year, because the value for the previous year can be even higher than the revenue for the actuals. But for now, for the simplistic purposes, let's focus only on actuals. And let's say that our result for now is gonna be just the max value, and we will return the result. And there will be a few things here. So let's drag it here. There are a few things. First thing is that on a total level, we actually get the correct result, because we can see that the maximum value is 259,000, which is okay. But there is like not a row context here, because not like it is a row context. However, my main goal was to fix this number and see that this kind of the number across each item. So on each item, I would like to see the same number, like the repetitive one, but still we see the actuals across the item. So let's pick this table, move a little bit to the top, and let's say we'd like to build from scratch our chart. Let's pick the month year column for a second as our x-axis. Let's move with the measures. The measures are the revenue actuals. We have the previous year. Don't worry about the look and the colors. It's not important. And we would like to also drag the maximum value here. So what you can see here, let's say that our columns for the previous year for now, let's make it less visible. So what you can see here now, we have the three measures. Let's focus on the actuals and the max value. You can see the max value is the same as the actuals, which is true. However, for the purpose of this column chart, we would like to have determine the ceiling. The ceiling means on each level, on each period, we would like to see the same number, which is the maximum. And now we didn't achieve this result because we have the same number for our max measure as we have for our actuals. So it's not exactly the outcome we wanted to achieve. And one thing that we can also apply here, which is important because we are using all selected. However, the month, year, as mentioned, is the text type column, and it's also sorted by the different columns from the from the calendar table. So in that case, maybe I will skip that for a second. I will show that in our case, our month, year column is sorted by month and year. So what we would like to achieve here is we can actually add this sorting column and press enter. And now what was changed and what you can see here also in the table is now we keep the maximum value across each element. So it's a good thing because now we are keeping the maximum value per each month, which allows us to create this kind of the ceiling. One thing is that we have this max value for our month, year column. Let's check how it would work if, let's say, we don't want to use the month, year column as here. Let's say we are using the short months. Our short month, it's month short. It's that one. So now you can see that there's a little bit different context because now we are using not like the concatenation of the months and years. We are just using the months, and the context is a little bit changed. So the total is still correct. We have seen the maximum value for our actuals. However, on the level of this one month, of this one row item, we still see the values for the actuals and not for the maximum fixed on each row. So it means that we can still tweak this measure a little bit because when working with the column charts, we're working on the visualization, we might want to drag a different columns x-axis, and we would like to make sure that our x-axis is always working correctly and the values actually are working correctly and retrieving the maximum value across each period as the same value. However, let's focus for a few seconds just on this example when we have the month, year column. Here the result is correct, but let's tweak it a little bit because what we would like to achieve is that we would like to, as mentioned, search not necessarily only the revenue actuals, but also trying to search through the previous year. Because if we go to the different, let's say, context, if I remember, maybe it was the cybersecurity, and let's pick a different segment, maybe that one. Let's try to find the situation like here where the previous year is higher than the actuals. You can see that here the previous year column is higher than the actuals. So even if we have the maximum achieved here as a 42,000, as you can see also here in the column, it's not necessarily giving us the top ceiling because as you can see, there is a previous value which is higher than our current ceiling for our actuals. So we would like to also see and scan the previous year values. So we are searching now also for this kind of the information. The 50,000 for this particular filter context is higher than the actuals. So without tweaking this measure, like picking a different logic for the calculations, just to show if we actually look for the maximum value across both the revenues and previous year. So what we are trying to achieve is just to use the maximum, and we are just looking at the actuals and the previous year at the same time. And if we press enter, you can see that now we are looking both at the actuals and the previous year. So now the ceiling is a little bit raised, which is okay. And now the maximum value is corresponding in that case for our previous year value, for our previous maximum, which is a 50,000. If we erase that slicer here and let's keep it on software, in that case, we are still looking for 2095 because it was in our previous filter context, it was the highest values in the actuals. But as we filtering and slicing, dicing the data, we might find a different actuals values, max values for actuals and the previous year. So it's also important to address that information in our calculation. And the one thing, as you can see here in our column charts, we now raised the ceiling, which is a first step, but we would need one additional step because our labels has to appear always on the top of the highest value, whether it's actuals or the previous year. So it's also recommended to raise the ceiling a little bit to have a more space between the column with the highest value and actually the ceiling, which allows us to bring more data labels. So we can, for instance, multiply this max value by, let's say, 125 or 1.3. So now you can see that this columns raised the top ceiling of our charts a little bit. So now we couldn't find the number, like exact number 336,000. We couldn't find it here because it's the maximum value, in that case 225,000 multiplied by whatever factor we applied. We applied the factor which is 1.3, but it's actually important in terms of our building this kind of solution because we had to raise the ceiling. So this is one of possible ways to achieve this kind of the result. However, let's see how this chart behave if we erase the month, year on our x-axis and replace it with our abbreviated short names as we have here. Because let's assume that in this use cases, we are focusing only on 1 year. It wouldn't be the case that some months are belonging to 1 year and to the other year at the same time. We won't be analyzing the last 12 months or any other more customized periods. It's just always the same year. So as we are analyzing the 1 year, we don't need like this kind of the x-axis type columns applied because this is like the redundancy in terms of seeing the 24 abbreviated year on each period, which is like it's not like recommended. You would like, in that particular case, we would like to see only the abbreviated names. So in that case, let's search for our short month. It's we replace the month, year column with our month short from our dim calendar, from our main calendar. And you can see that we're still facing the same issue because now we lost our top ceiling. We still see the actual, or rather we are now determining the maximum value, but on each row separately, which is not what we want because we lost our ceiling. We are not able to achieve this kind of the look. So one thing that I would like to achieve, I will tweak this kind of the measure a little bit. It's still working fine. With further tweaking, we might also achieve a good result using like this kind of approach. I would like also to show you a different approach that I recently like to use across different use cases. So instead of all selected in that case, I will use the values instead. And I will pick one specific column that I would like to include. In that case, it can be the month and year column. And what I would like to do is use add column. And we will keep our table with our values for the month and years. And let's say I would like to add our actuals. Our actuals is the revenue IC. And what we also can do is we can add the previous year. There are two different ways of achieving that. We can only use one column with the metrics. We can use two as it's shown here. I will also show you in a moment the second approach. So we have the add columns. So we have now the months. We have now the corresponding values for the actuals, corresponding values for the previous year. And what we can also use is to use the calculated table, and we can say that it's all selected for our entire calendar, but not the supplemental one. We are basing our solution on our dim calendar here. Our max value is now like, it also has to be changed in that case. we are looking at the max value. Let's change this element because it's now not retrieving the metrics, it's now retrieving the table actually. So let's call it as our base table, and our variable, it's gonna be the value. And now we can use the maximum because we are searching for the maximum value of our base table. And let's, like, for a second, let's use the just our column, which is called AC, the actuals. For now, let's assume that we are checking only and we are checking the actuals, and we won't be raising the ceiling. We won't be multiplying by any additional factors that just place, just using the one, just to make like the placeholder for using the multiplier a little bit later on, and just press result. So now you can see that it's also working for the mouse, which is okay. We are using the effect on an entire calendar table. So now we are protecting also our solution when working with a different, let's say, month columns or any other like variants of the column types that we would like to place on our x-axis. But one thing that we can see that we are now checking only the actuals. So if I bring some kind of the filter context that actually have actuals in a different, like not actuals, but rather the previous year, we can still see that we are just missing the previous year values. We just have to bring those previous year values as well to our measure. So we have two options. The one option is that we can use the maximum here, and we can actually also apply and close to the base table. We have to also close our max. And now you can see that we are now getting we are checking both the actuals and the previous year. So we get the correct value. And this is the one approach. One additional approach might require using only the one row here. We can use just the one row of the metric. Let's make it commented here just to show you an alternative approach. It was our previous one, but let's say we have a different approach. We can also use the max here and bring both measures at this stage. We are checking the maximum between the actuals and the previous year. We have this one, and now we can erase the maximum here and just check the value, and we should get the same result, because whatever the actuals or the previous year is higher or lower, we are addressing that at this level, and then we are just retrieving the maximum value for the column which is called the value. And you can see that the result is still the same. So both approaches can work. I like that one. It's like visible for me that I'm searching for the actuals and the previous year, and then I searching for the maximum basing on both metrics added, but both in that particular context give us the same result for the use case we are working on. So let's erase this additional column. We have still this column, and let's start building the one additional column chart with this solution. There will be a few things to talk about as well. So we'll be working on a revenue AC. We have the revenue previous year. Let's say that our revenue previous year will be our left side column. It's not always the case. Sometimes clients ask to see the previous year after the actuals. However, if you would like to make it chronological, the previous year can be in many cases on the left side, because course, we have the values for the previous year than for the actuals, but it's not always the case. In that case, let's go to the previous year. Let's change the color to the grayish one. Maybe also apply the maybe not match field turn off here and make it a little bit darker. What is also important, just to let you know, is also to add the y-axis constant line. In that case, it's gonna be a 0. It can be a solid, not a hatched. Let's go the width to 1. Now, in that case, the transparency also should be 0%. And now we are achieving a nice baseline. In case of our x-axis, we would like to see the short move. From January to December. And maybe I will, for a second, erase the segment. Let's change the naming convention from whatever we had to the previous year and to the actuals. And now we can put our new measure, which was called the max value. We can place it here. There will be a small nuances. So as you can see, there is also a case of the legend. The legend is also included. Now it's turned on. So you can see that unfortunately, we also see in our legend the max value. There are a few things we can do about it. So we have the previous year, which looks good. We have the actual, which also looks good in terms of how the legend is now set up, but the max value is not, it's not looking good. So we can input just a space character here. So the good thing is that it's now the name, it's not visible, it's no longer visible. However, we can still see the dot one, like the marker, which is not what we want. However, if we go to this series for our column and we change the color to white, now you can see that there is no information, like there is no visible information about the placeholder column. It's still visible as a small offset here. There is a space and it's white, so it's a little bit like the workarounded. However, I believe it's still sufficient. It's still enough in terms of it's still acceptable, because the space between the previous year and actual is not so visible. It's not so meaningful. I think it might not be like the best ideal scenario. We would like to don't have any kind of the play space here. However, I think there are some compromise that we can take here. What are some kind of the other options we have in terms of the placement? We have dragged this new placeholder measure here, but this is not nice that we have this kind of the space here, and we can also drag it at the end. And the nice thing about having this at the end is that we have this previous year and actuals legend like close each other. However, there's also a case of this this column. This is okay that on legend we don't see any kind of additional elements here, which is a good thing. However, you can see that now it's not exactly centralized. It's the column for the previous year and the actuals are not centered in terms of where we can see the name of the month. So if we place this placeholder in the middle, it might get us a little bit better impression of how it's structured, of how it is centered to the to our name of the field place on our x-axis. But there are certain things we can also achieve, because now it's like the cluster column chart without any kind of the overlapped elements. I will also turn off the tooltips. So let's go again here to the columns, and let's go to all. In that case, we are enabling the layout section, and we have a few things that we can achieve, and actually maybe not achieve, but apply. In that case, there is an overlap option. We can make an overlap turn on, and we can increase the overlap in that case. So you can see that there is some kind of off, like not everything looks as expected. So let's assume that we can move to the columns. Maybe something is not working well. And we actually pick the white color, but it's not fully transparent. It was only 5% of the transparency. So if we go with 100%, we can see that now we don't see this column, but it's probably still the border visible because there is a not nice line on this previous year columns. So we can also go to the transparency and we can move to the 100%. We can also actually entirely turn off the border. And now it looks quite good. In terms of the layout, let's go to the all. Once again, we have the space between series. It determines of the level of the overlapped columns. So I believe if we are using the placeholder in the middle, anywhere like 30% looks, in that case, looks almost like it's not overlapped feature. So I think with the middle centered placeholder, it might be better to increase the space between series, maybe to some kind of the 40% or so. And there is also a case of space between categories. We can make it a little bit bigger. Let's say the 35% and 40% for space between series, but it's not rule of thumb. It can be tweaked and can be either decreased or increased, decreased, depending on our need, depending on how big is our of our chart, because we might have the chart which is this size or this size, so we have to flexibly adjust it. So a few things that now we would like to adjust. We go to the data labels for our previous year. Let's say we would like to turn it off. For our actuals, turn it off, and we only have the labels for our placeholder. But there is one more thing we just have to apply. For our max value, as you can see here, we have tested a few approaches, but what we would like to also achieve is to write the ceiling. So we have to use the multiplier. It can be 125, 1.3, as mentioned before. Let's say it's gonna be 1.3. So the moment we press the enter, you can see the ceiling for this chart will be raised. So as it's now raised, we have placed this series here, and we would like go to the values. And now the values shouldn't be corresponding to the revenue previous. It's actually picked the previous year. Sorry. So we can collapse the columns to not interfere with our data labels and go to our placeholder, and we will establish the value and the data. In terms of our value, we can just simply drag our revenue AC here. And let's say it's gonna be in thousands. And now we are seeing the values for our actuals. And then we go to the details, and for our detail, we can go to the revenue previous year, and we can bring it here. It doesn't look okay. It looks like something is off. It's because the layout. The layout, it calls for the single line. So whenever you use the details section, it's gonna be side by side placed with the main values. So we'd like to switch the single line with the multi-line. So now we have the two layers of the tooltips of the labels. And one thing that we can also adjust is the revenue. It doesn't has to be like the auto, it can be 1,000. The most important thing is whatever you use the auto or fix on millions, thousand, it's important to just make it unified. So whatever we pick on our actuals, we have the same units for our previous year. The unification is very important. It doesn't has to be like italic. I think it's not important to be italic. So it might be fine if it will be presented as here. If one decimal is not required, we can also just skip the value decimal places and set it as 0. And if we use it as for previous year, we can use it the same method for our actuals. For our actuals, we can potentially also make it bolded to pay more attention to the actuals, because now the actuals are more important. It can be bolded. It's not necessary, but in some cases it can add some like visual value, because we are now highlighting the value for actuals a little bit. And in terms of the previous year, we can change the colors to some kind of the gray. It doesn't have to be the same gray as the column, because column might be visible enough, but not necessarily the labels will be visible enough if we apply the same. So it doesn't have to be like the same kind of the gray. It can be similar one. So let's say we are keeping this kind of the grayish color. So now we are keeping both tables at the same time. I will move this table a little bit to the top. It's not so important for us at this moment. I will I will show you also the use case with the visual calculations in a second, but now let's focus on our charts here. So this is a one thing that I wanted to show you, and we actually achieve a similar results as here. We have two layers of the labels. What we can also wanted to do is to turn off our y-axis values. We don't need it. As we have these values here, I think it might be just enough to make it only visible values here. We don't have to use y-axis scale visible. And this is the one thing. Of course, then we can use also bring the title like the revenue development or the revenue, maybe revenue development year-over-year comparison. It can be anything. And in terms of the subtitle, it can be as simple as, for example, the currency. It might be also related with the period selected. In that case, it should be dynamic. However, for the simplification, I would just wanted to show that we actually finish our building of this chart with applying the title and subtitles. However, like it can be like structured in a different way, both in terms of what is in the title and also what is in a subtitle. And this is the one variant. The second variant I wanted to show is that we don't necessarily have to use, as mentioned before, we don't have to use like the two layers of the labels. We might also use only just the one. So let's go to the data labels. And there are a few things that we can also consider. Let's consider the use case where we actually don't want to have any kind of the details. We can just erase details for a moment. And we have only the revenue actuals. Let's say that instead of revenue actuals, you would like to see the revenue variance for each period. So instead of using the revenue actuals, we can either bring the absolute variance. So we can see what was the difference between the actuals and the previous year. In that case, 20,000 minus 33,000, 25,000, and so on. Or we can also bring the revenue variance relative previous year. We can also bring both if it would be meaningful for the use cases. However, we will be also fine with having one strategic variances depending on what is most important in our use case. Sometimes it can be absolute, sometimes it can be relative. We don't have to have like both. We can also have only one specific, which is the most important. But now, as we have the variances, the relative variances, which is in a percentage, let's go to the none in that case. And the one thing that we might also want to achieve is when we have the revenue variance relative previous year, let's change it to the percentages. So now we can see this in a percentage. We can turn off the bold here. So now we can see the relative change in year-over-year growth. So it's the 14% growth minus 21% growth, and so on. This one is quite high because like there was a high actuals comparing to the very low previous year values. One thing that we can also add, and it's oftentimes, not always, oftentimes recommended, is adding a plus sign before the percentages which are in a positive, with the positive sign. So we can actually visit the format box and we can actually place it here. So I just add before the values which are positive, and it's gonna be minus for the negative, and it's gonna be 0%. So now you can see that our relative variances are now with the plus sign. So if it's negative, it's still the minus as it was before, but for the positive variances, as here for plus 40, for example, or plus 94, it's still this additional plus at the beginning, which is oftentimes recommended. What can be achieved further is that we can apply the conditional formatting on our labels. So to give you a sign, additional like visual clue whether it's a positive or negative variance. So what we can do is we can go to, in that case, we use the value section to incorporate the relative variances. So we can go to the value section to the color, and we can use the FX button to create the color conditionally for our relative variances. we already have one measure for bringing the color. So we are we checking whether the absolute variance is the positive or negative. And we checking using the switch true whether it's like the above zero, whether it's equal to zero, or whether it's below zero. And depending on the condition, we are retrieving the hex code color, referencing a different measure, whether it's a positive, neutral, or negative. Just to quickly show you, let's say as an example, the positive variance color can look like that. It's just retrieving as one determined fixed color, hex code color for the positive variances. So now we have already in this kind of the coloring for the year-over-year changes we have already in place. So we can use it in using the FX button. And if we change we can use the rules, it will be fine. It's less standardized in that case. We have more options, but it can be still achievable. We just have to bring, let's say, our absolute as on our condition. We can have the new rule, and whatever everything will be the number, let's say. So from the minimum to the zero, from the zero to the maximum. It's like the more simplistic approach. We could also use the gray one for the zeros, let's say. But let's just to show an example, let's assume that we have the minimum up to the zero and max. It's gonna be green, let's say. So we will change the color here. We are basing the rules on the absolute previous year, which is fine. Minimum zero, zero max. And if we press enter or OK, you can see now that the negative variances are in red and the positive variances now in green, which is fine. I will erase the conditional formatting colors for a second, and I will show a different approach. The different approach is based on a field value. And let's reference to our previous year FX color. It's the same as I shown you just a few seconds before. So we are placing the field value revenue variance absolute previous year FX color and press OK, and we achieve the same result. The field value is fine in many cases because we might have this sentiment color stored as a measures, for example, and if you would like to change from some reason the colors, and we always place the conditionally formatted color using the field value, it will correspond to this reference sentiment colors every time, and in each solution and in each chart or table. So we achieve that result with the field value, placing the additional measure, and we have this kind of an outcome. As we see the relative variance in our top ceiling layer of labels here, what we can also do is to go back to the actual values and actually turn that on, because we turned this series off. Now we can turn it on. Let's say it's gonna be displayed as thousands without decimal places. And now you can see that in this particular use case, you still see both the relative variances and also the actuals. So we make a decision that previous year values are no longer visible in that use case. We're only focusing on the actuals and the relative variances. So we ended with two different outcomes. This is the one. This is the second one, that like the alternative. But as mentioned, you have a lot of flexible approaches. You can combine like the relative. You can also bring the absolute variances. You can bring the previous year values here. So there are plenty of different options. But I think that one and that one, assuming you would like to use this kind of the workaround and have this ceiling for additional layer of labels, these two use cases might be the one that can be used and more often comparing to some other combinations, but feel free to check also the other alternatives. And this is pretty much almost all of it, almost all I wanted to share with you today. However, one thing that I also wanted to show is that we can achieve the similar result using also the visual calculations. In many cases, I just like to use the typical DAX approach. However, visual calculations can be great in many cases. In that case, also can be valuable if you'd like to rely your charts on the visual calculations. I'm not saying it's a way to go. I'm not saying the DAX is better or the visual calculations are better. I just wanted to show you that there is also an alternative using the visual calculations. So in that case, let's start expanding our table with one additional visual calculations to show you that we achieve the same result. So in that case, we go to the custom and we start building our max value based on a visual calculation. So let's gonna name it as max value. And there will be a few different approaches. There may be 2, 3, 4 approaches, but let's say we will use just one. So we are looking for the max value. What is our table? Our table is just our rows. And we are looking for the maximum of our revenue or the previous year. So let's compare them. So we are looking at the max and previous year. So now when I press enter, you can see the number 259, which is okay. The grand total here, it's not correct. It's still going, it's still summarizing all the revenue actuals in that case. It's still checking whether it's that one or that one. It's higher and it's actually bringing that number, which in that case, if you would like to bring this max value to our chart, it will work fine, because what is the most important for our use case is what we see on a row level and not on a grand total level. So just to let you know one thing in terms of our calculations, one thing that we still have to apply the multiplier factor, let's say 1.3, because we would like to raise the ceiling a little bit. So we are multiplying that by 1.3 as an example, as we used it previously. So we are achieving the same result as our DAX approach, the same 36,000. So the only thing is that the grand total is not correct, but it's not a problem for our use cases. We achieve exactly the same result. And as a bonus, just wanted to show you what is the difference between this, like the visual calculations, if we don't care about the grand total. So I will copy and paste this kind of the chart. I will erase our placeholder which was the DAX based, and I will just show you how it will look like if we have the same visual calculations. So I will back to our table and I will go to the edit calculations. I will copy this kind of the visual calculations and paste our newly created chart. There will be like a few things to adjust, but I would like to show you the result. So now our fields are called the previous year and AC, so I have to adjust this AC and to previous year. And let's go. So as you can see, we still get the appropriate results. We still see the ceiling. It's perfectly fine for our max value calculations. It's perfectly fine. One thing that it won't work as we would like to expect. Let's say we would like to go to the edit calculations. Let's say I would make it hidden. We don't need this ceiling for a second. And if you would like, let's say I would like to use from some reason the maximum value as a line. So we can add a line and there is an FX button. And let's say I would like to rely on our max value and press OK. So as you can see, the ceiling is very high and all the columns are very marginal comparing to the line that just appeared. And it's because if we use the constant line using the FX button, it's actually relying not on the row level context. Like here we have this number, which was fine in terms of on a context on a level of each month separately. However, in terms of using the FX, let's say on a y-axis constant line, it brings the total value, which is in that case 2 millions, on above 2 millions. So in that case, this kind of the line showing us actually not this kind of value, but rather whatever we see on a total level. So one thing that we might also adjust, assuming that you would like to achieve some kind of the lines, not the columns as a placeholder that we were building throughout our today meeting, for our today video. Let's assume we would like to add some kind of additional lines, etc. So we would have to adjust these visual calculations a little bit. So let's go to the new visual calculations. We won't be building a new one, but we would like to tweak a little bit. So the only one thing that we might also add, but it not only for the context of adding this additional lines or rising a ceiling using the maximum y-axis value. So in that case, we can use the expand all. Actually, it can be still as it's okay to make it as here, and it's gonna be rows. And if you back to the report, you can see that now still the table is now relying on a previous calculation, but now you can see the line is on a expected level. Just to make sure, let's go with the same logic here. I will actually go here and go to the edit calculation, and we apply here the same logic with the expand all. Let's bring it here. And you can see now that we actually pick the same value, the maximum value, also bring it on a total level. So it's also correct now in the table, and we can reuse it for multiple different use cases, as adding the maximum as a constant line or adding a maximum as y-axis. In a value section, if you go the column y-axis, we can still use the minimum value, maximum value, also using the FX button. So with the visual calculations and using expand all, in that case, we can also bring this total, because the totals will be important when using the FX buttons for this particular features in our charts and tables. So the summary, we use the DAX based approach, visual calculation approach, and we try to still make some kind of the remake for the data label positioning and the values from this kind of the layout, moving to this kind of the layout. Of course, it won't be used like in every use case. It's not like a rule of thumb that we have to place these labels on the top. However, it's just good to know what tools and what steps we can apply if we have to, and we are just to some extent forced to use some kind of the workarounds. In that case, we can use the DAX-based approach, visual approach, to raise the ceiling, to place the data labels where we have, and to put additional context to our charts, comparing that it fits certain requirements. As mentioned, just to remember, the requirements for this use case was to showcase the actuals for each column. So like it has to, the data labels for actuals has to appear on the level of each column. No kind of the overlapped labels or cut labels where they were not visible because, let's say, for the previous year values just take up and take the space for the actuals. It was the one thing, and the second requirement was to use the column chart instead of the line chart. If we could use the line charts also would work well for many use cases, but it was like building this additional workaround using the tools we have. So for our today meeting is all I wanted to share with you. Hope for some use cases is gonna be valuable. And I think some kind of the tool sets and steps might be also useful for different use cases, not necessarily to have these two kinds of the labels, but also to other use cases and other functionalities. So for now it's all, and see you again in the next video. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.